the vlogs, they looked perfectly happy, but that's just the reality. Hello everyone, it's not even in... Hello everyone, my name is Michelle, and today I am going to be talking about the Gabby Petito case. All of the manipulation and all of the preventable things that could have happened. This video is really important to people who are in a violent domestic relationship or emotional threatening, and also people who know someone who is in a relationship like that, because I know a lot of the time you just think someone's with someone that's toxic. There could be a situation that turns out like this one, and you don't think it'll happen to you until it happens to you. So make sure to give this video a like, comment, subscribe for the algorithm, because then YouTube is like, oh rad, like I guess I'll push this video. Gabby Petito and her boyfriend were living the van lifestyle. It's really something that's becoming popular, and she wanted to make a blog about it, and she was making a website and recording it and uploading it to YouTube. If you look at the videos, they look great until you see that this guy's literally reading a book about a murderer. People now think that that book he was reading, that she was vlogging him reading, was actually his inspiration for the upcoming event. These guys were at a park. A person ended up calling the police and saying, you know what, I saw domestic violence in a case which the male was physically hurting the female, and he grabbed her face along with like her arms. They were driving along in a 15-mile-per-hour speed zone. The police were following them because of this, but then they actually noticed the van swerved to the side of the road, so they ended up turning their lights on, pulling them over, and they said that they had gotten these calls about domestic violence and they just wanted to interview them. If you've ever had experience with police officers when it comes to mental health, unfortunately many of them really don't know a lot. I'm sure a lot of them do, but also a lot of them are completely oblivious because they have so much training to do regarding being a police officer that they may not have time. That's not their area of interest. When the police were asking her about big marks and bruises, they were like, did he do this to you? It's okay, like you can tell us if he did this to you. She just kind of said like, I don't know, I'm not sure, and she was so in denial about it because that's how people are when they're brainwashed in a relationship, especially if you think about it from a personal stance. If you and your significant other got pulled over, you don't want to press any charges, you just want to get on with what you're doing. You don't want to have to worry about someone spending the night in jail. And the reason that in situations with domestic violence such as this, usually one person will end up going to jail for a night or so. I'm not exactly sure how long, because the system knows that they can't trust police officers to make these one decisions, like whether they should or shouldn't take the person in, because they are unable to make that decision. In the video, Gabby ended up completely defending him. She said it was all my fault. It was my fault that he hit me because I hit him first. And basically she just like, I'm not sure what she did, but she scratched him. It did not warrant the abuse that he inflicted on her. In the video, it is so sad. Gabby is trying to explain that it is all her fault. She gets stressed out and starts freaking him out. What she's explaining is she's not sure why he was mad at her. He just decided to be mad at her for no reason. And the thing that she did wrong was she said something in a mean voice, and that made him really upset. So he ended up throwing her stuff out, and so she would be forced to leave her car, and he locked the door and he said, you can't come in until you take a power walk. And she's like, what the hell, like I need water. I haven't had water in a long time, because these guys are in a van and they don't want to use plastic bottles, so they're going all the way over here to get water. The police officer was actually asking her questions after she didn't even have time to answer the first one, because she was borderline hyperventilating, having a panic attack. Individuals who have experienced trauma need time to even process what they're saying, but oftentimes they're so brainwashed that they can't even process it at all. The thing that the police officers completely neglected was someone called and said that he physically hit her. Gabby's obviously going to defend her abuser, and she said, well no, like he kind of, but in the call they said that he was verbally abusing her and physically abusing her, and they kind of showed up to the scene acting like that didn't happen. On her boyfriend's side of the scene, he was just succeeding so well during the video footage. he's so happy that he can manipulate the cops because he adopts this kind of bro attitude with them. He's like, you know how girls are, like they can be dramatic. And then the cop goes over to Gabby and he's like, yeah, you know, my ex-wife, she was really emotional. I was emotional, so fed off each other. It was really bad. He was like, well, now my new wife, like we don't, because, you know, she doesn't have anxiety, and he's trying to help her, but like that's obviously not going to be helpful in this situation. Something that happens all the time with police officers is they don't want to make a big deal out of it. They don't want to have to make a whole case out of it. When they see the situation on surface level, they're like, you know what, these are just two kids, 22 years old, and they're just having a little fight. We don't want to have to send them into jail because of this. The law where the police have a duty to obey the law because they don't trust the individual police to make that decision, the law says that the primary aggressor has to be charged. If this hadn't happened, then there's a very high chance that this whole thing may not have happened in the first place. That is why that law is in place. They decided that she was actually the aggressor in the situation, which, looking back at the situation, is obviously ridiculous. This young girl is going to stay in a van by herself, and she expressed that she has anxiety about it. And no offense, it's scary sometimes a girl to be on her own in very low population area at night, who explained that she has severe anxiety about it. When she was pleading for them to not get Brian in trouble, she was like, please just give me a ticket. It was my fault. Like, don't charge him whatsoever. If you've never been in a abusive relationship, I can make a whole video about it because it's extremely educational. A lot of the time people have no idea that they are being abusive or are being abused. So the police officers decided to go back in their van and kind of talk about it, what the people wanted and what they had to do by law. And something that is extremely eerie is when they were talking about it without Gabby and Brian, they were saying the reason that this law is in place is people in abusive relationships usually end up going back to the person. It is a literal brainwash. It's kind of like an addiction for the person. The police officer actually said he doesn't have a crystal ball. He should have, unfortunately. During the entire time, the police officers basically said that Gabby, in fact, was the primary aggressor, and they had absolutely no inkling at all that perception of looking at her point of view whatsoever, or what kind of aggression might be actually happening. So the way that they decided to deal with it was they asked Gabby, did you want to cause him physical pain when you first punched him? She said, no, absolutely not. And they were like, okay, that's great. Whereas they definitely should have asked that question to Brian. Something that all of the officers were unable to realize were that Gabby was the victim of being locked out of the van, which is her home. The police officers actually assumed that the van belonged to Brian. Like, for some reason, they had image of who they were based on their age and what they looked like. Gabby was the victim of having to stand outside in the heat with no water. I can't even imagine if she said she was really thirsty. Like, I'm sure she doesn't complain a lot. The fact that she was expressing that your brain can't work properly when you're so thirsty. They didn't even ask for license and registration when they pulled her over, which is standard protocol. So right from the beginning, not professional or handled properly whatsoever, because a lot of the time the person doesn't get murdered, and people neglect to think that this is going to be that situation just because it doesn't look exactly like what they might assume. They basically just thought this was teenage angst. He also took Gabby's phone off of her, which means that she's in the middle of nowhere without a phone and she cannot contact her family. They never questioned him at all about leaving bruises on her arms and literally taking her by the face. Something like that is extremely more bothering than taking, for example, by like the arm, because the face is an extremely delicate spot next to the neck and it's an extremely distressing place to be held. It's a domination tactic and it's really scary. He lied about not having a phone, and then later in the police video it turned out that he did have a phone. The police officers seemingly forgot and just went on with the investigation. While Gabby was completely defending him, Brian was saying, well, she grabbed the wheel when I was driving, and he was like throwing her under the bus and lying, because when they asked Gabby about it, she's being extremely truthful, but she also adamantly said, I did not touch the wheel. Some simple knowledge that would be extremely beneficial for police officers to know in this situation. The victims of domestic violence often will defend their abuser, oftentimes because if they don't, when this is all over, they're going to be extremely blamed for all of this by the abuser. the abuser will gaslight the victim into believing it was their fault, which was evident, and it's really scary to actually see how, for lack of a better word, brainwashed she was. So after all of this situation went away, a few days later, Gabby posted to her Instagram, but it was kind of odd because it was kind of a different picture that they took in the past, and usually she would post right away, and the caption was really odd. It didn't seem like she wrote it. It is actually a Happy Halloween post that she made, which is super odd because it was in August. Later on, a few days later, Gabby's mom receives a text message that sounded super weird that said, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." The reference to Stan was regarding her grandfather, but the mother, she never calls him Stan. The mother was concerned that something was wrong with her daughter. People were trying to explain to her, like, no, your daughter's fine. There's no reception out there. Gabby's mom was like, she contacts me every day, if not every other day. And she was fishy, but a lot of the time the police officers have to wait because at the moment there's no evidence or reason to suspect foul play, even though in this situation there definitely was. After the fact, when people started seeing this whole thing blow up on the news, some people stepped forward and they said one of the last times that Gabby was seen, if not the last time, she was at this cafe eating with him, and he got super mad because for some reason they wouldn't give him a discount or a refund. He was getting extremely mad, swearing, being extremely disruptive and loud. He kind of just dramatically, like a child, left the restaurant without paying, and so Gabby ended up crying outside, and then she ended up going inside and apologizing on his behalf. He actually came back inside, not once, not twice, but 4 times, to come back in and insist talking to the manager. He wanted to make sure that they knew that the hostess was wrong and she should be reprimanded. After this, Gabby goes radio silent. There is a whole investigation going on, and everyone's like, well, here's this camera footage, and he most likely did it because then after that he ended up going missing, but he was actually just hiding at his parents' house. Something that was really, really lucky in the case was that this random couple who were also in the van life had this camera just recording as they were driving. And so after they heard about this case, the female went on the footage and she was like praying and praying and praying because she knew she was in a very similar spot. She remembered seeing the van and thinking, these guys are from Florida, and I'd kind of like to say hi to them because we're also from Florida and we're far away from Florida, literally on the opposite side of the country. But they figured that nothing was really wrong. They were probably just on a hike because the vehicle had its shades pulled down and it was empty. How did Brian get home to his dad? He actually used Gabby's credit card to get home to his dad, and this is after he had strangled her to death. Her parents tried to make peace with the situation, knowing that she died looking at what she loved in a place that she loved, and that her life was stolen from her. So Brian ended up going missing. Brian ended up leaving his parents' house, and they just said, I don't know where he is. He went on this trip, and obviously he does this a lot, and he was probably fine, but they ended up finding his car in Florida, and it was the entrance to this swamp that is not a place that people go hiking or camping. It was really hot, boggy kind of situation, and basically even very prolonged survivalists wouldn't even be able to survive this or want to. But for the longest time, police officers thought that he was in there because his parents were adamant, saying that he's a very tactic survivalist. He's probably hiding in there because they know that they're suspicious of him and that he was most likely the culprit, although at this time he was only a person of interest because there was no evidence. Finally, Brian's body was found in a swamp, dead. Gabby's parents just hate him. They think he's a coward, and he most likely committed suicide, and it's a situation with either psychopathy, sociopathy, where this individual, he didn't want to go to jail. He did not want to deal with this situation. I'm not sure what was going through his head. The survivalists didn't think he could make it. The people trying to find him, there was an extreme rescue mission because it's an extremely big camp, swamp. There were professional divers and volunteers trying to find him. So the situation now is basically closed. There's not much to be done. This boy took the life of a girl, and it's extremely sad if you watch this interview between the parents, because they discuss how when they close their eyes, they don't see Gabby as she is as a 22-year-old. They see her as she was when she was 5 years old and she was little and she had bangs, and it's just disturbing and wrong, and this is why, if you know anyone who's in a situation like that, some people will at the very least be extremely traumatized by the situation. When the mother saw the footage of the police officers, she said she just wishes so bad she could give her a hug because she just looked like such a scared little girl, which I completely agree with. She was mortified and brainwashed and having a panic attack. They didn't even give her time to calm down. In the vlogs, they looked perfectly happy, but that's just the reality of online sources. Brian was always seen as this amazing, eco-friendly man. He insisted on eating out of cantaloupes instead of using plates, and he didn't want to use water bottles. He denied water from the police officers, even though Gabby was so thirsty that she accepted it. In the vlog that she made, it was really, really good and really, really exciting because of how beautiful the places she was traveling. She was so happy, so energetic. But in one of the videos, you could clearly see he was reading a book, and he was actually reading a book about a murderer, and it is now known that his murder tactic was almost like inspired by this book, which is just like, I don't know. The parents say even though this shouldn't have happened to Gabby, it should not happen to anyone, and they're just working so hard at making sure of this. It's really sad, especially if you know someone or who has been in an abusive relationship, or you yourself have been in an abusive relationship. It's horrible to see that and scream, and the mother said she wanted to jump through the screen and just explain, like, what the hell? Everyone agrees that these police officers were just completely mishandling the situation. I know that we should hold them specifically accountable, but this is just something general. Police officers just don't know. So let me know if you got anything out of this video. I know it's super sad, but it's something that's near and dear to my heart, so make sure to give this video a like, comment, subscribe, for the algorithm, because then YouTube is like, oh rad, like I guess I'll push this video. There's a bunch of videos on Gabby Petito online that just go into so much depth about it and the psychology of it, and you should definitely continue to do research on it because it's really educational and important. Thank you so much for watching this video, and goodbye.